Hey guys, what's up? It is your friendly neighborhood UberGoose here. I'm going to talk to you guys today more about Resto Druid and Legion. This video I'm going to be covering mostly the mana efficiency side of Resto Druid, and to back it up, I do have footage of me doing some healing in raid content to help illustrate and maybe even help you just by watching me play. I do believe that one of the best ways to improve at something you're trying to do is looking at other people doing that thing, whether they're better or worse than you. You can glean tiny bits of information. But let's get right into it and talk about mana efficiency. Firstly, I'm going to let you know that the basic, hierarchy, the basic tier list of your mana efficient spells is going to be Tranquility at the top, obviously, but that is a healing cooldown, so we're going to remove that from the equation. Second place would be Efflorescence, followed by Cenarian Ward, then Wild Growth, then Swiftmend, Lifebloom, Rejuvenation, Healing Touch, and Regrowth, all in that order. And I will try to explain these numbers a bit more so you can understand why a lot of the time I don't actually have Efflorescence down. And why I'm not necessarily casting Wild Growth off cooldown. Because there's obviously a lot more factors than just strictly what is the most mana efficient. And if you are curious how all of these were calculated, it's incredibly simple. All I did was look at my tooltips, and that's it. I took the amount of healing that it did, and I divided by the mana. Slight modification for Regrowth to make the initial heal 40% higher of a number, because it does have a 40% increased crit chance, but all of the other numbers are effectively assuming that there is no mastery and no crit, right? I believe haste is actually worked into the tooltips. At least that's what I'm pretty sure about, because my efflorescence ticks at 1.6 seconds on the tooltip, which obviously doesn't evenly fit into 30. So I'm assuming that haste is working in the tooltips. So first let's talk about Efflorescence. So Efflorescence obviously is a pretty expensive, almost 50,000 mana spell that puts down this green ring that you can actually see currently on the Eloreth fight. And as long as people are inside of it, it'll hit 3 people every time it ticks, and it ticks, for me, for example, every 1.6 seconds. And every time that it ticks, it'll just heal 3 random people. It'll be smart. It'll always heal people who are injured if there are people who are injured within the circle. And that it's as simple as that. It just heals every whatever your interval happens to be based on your haste. And there's nothing complicated about it at all. It has no innate synergy with the rest of our kit. It is just a heal, and it's as simple as that. Obviously, it does benefit from crit, but it does not trigger Living Seed. It does benefit from mastery, however, it does not give more mastery unless you have the Spring Blossoms talent, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So in general, Efflorescence is the most efficient. However, you have to keep in mind a lot of other factors, such as the lack of synergy that it has with the rest of our kit. And also, here's the big one. It is always going to do a lot of overhealing. A lot of it. When you do factor in... I made some assumptions with these calculations, and I could go more in depth in the comments if you are curious about them, but I did make the assumption that, let's say, Efflorescence has about a 50% overheal rate, which, based on logs from me and various other people that I've looked at, that seems to be roughly in the ballpark. A lot of the time it's a bit over 50%, sometimes it's a bit under. I'm going to say 50% for simplicity's sake. And then when comparing it against something like Rejuve, specifically, in order for Efflorescence to actually be worth the mana, it needs to be hitting people for, at minimum, 17 of its 30-second duration. 17 seconds of its 30-second duration. And that can be quite difficult, depending on the fight. Ursoc, which you're seeing on your screen right now, is a perfect example of that. Very, very bad fight for Efflorescence, and it's a huge... this is a perfect example of a fight where I actually just don't cast Efflorescence outside of pull and innervates. I don't know if I do in this fight use innervate, because this was heroic. We have so much gear that, I don't need to worry too much about innervate when we overgear the shit out of it. Although we are 2 healing these Emerald Nightmare fights, so maybe I should have, but it didn't end up mattering. I don't think I innervated, so I don't think I did any more Efflorescences. I could be wrong about that. I honestly do not remember. So My apologies. I might have put it down more times, but I do think Ursoc is a good example of a fight where you generally don't want to be placing it a lot. Um, I might actually do it here. Point is, if there's high movement, then efflorescence is quite weak, right? You need this minimum amount of time, and obviously you're not going to bust out your calculator and start plotting out the amount of time people are in certain locations in some like monstrous computer program of fucking predictability chart of how people are going to be moving in the fight. Like, you don't need to do anything complicated. Just be like, are people not going to move in like the next 15 seconds? If yes, sure, I'll put it down. Right? It's generally that simple. Second most efficient, obviously, again, we're excluding Tranquility from this. Second most efficient is going to be Cenarian Ward. That one's pretty simple. You're just going to use it to spot heal. You just want to throw it down on some dude who's already taken damage or about to take damage that needs some big single target healing. Very efficient for that. Pretty much her only spot healing tool, realistically, that we have. And it's good for that. Obviously, it's a 30-second cooldown, so you're not going to get too much use out of it, but it can definitely, see a lot of use. In fact, I'm, like, not using it in this fight because I'm stupid. I'm really bad at using Swiftmend and Cenarian Ward, like, frequently and well. So that's one of the big things that I need to, like, consciously bring to my next raid night. To try and improve on it. And obviously watching these clips is helping me realize that, considering Swiftmend is still chilling there, not being used. But next, after Cenarian Ward, we have Wild Growth. This one's pretty good. You can generally make it work, especially in progression rating. You can definitely figure out a way to make it so Wild Growth is going to do a very low amount of overhealing, especially on a fight like Ursoc. And in those situations, yeah, just throw it out, right? Like, if it's not going to do a lot of overhealing, just use Wild Growth. Obviously, you do want to have some rejuves out first for the synergy with the artifact weapon, because your artifact weapon does have 2 out of 3 golden traits devoted to Wild Growth, so it is pretty important to have, Wild Growth as a pretty high usage spell. So just throw it out there. After Wild Growth, we have Swiftmend. Pretty much same story as Cenarian Ward. Main difference is that Cenarian Ward you can pretty safely put on a tank in low damage situations, while Swiftmend is far more reactionary than that. You really can't just be like, okay, I'm gonna Swiftmend this tank when he gets to such and such health, because you don't actually know if they're gonna get to that health, right? Like, you don't actually know. Maybe your hots will keep them up, maybe they pop a defensive or whatever, right? It's more just, you have to consciously think at any moment when people are missing health, is this a time where I should Swiftmend? If the answer is yes, then use it. So that one's, again, very self-explanatory. Lifebloom is up next after Swiftmend, and Lifebloom is a pretty cool one. This is not even including the fact that it procs clear casting, and that's actually a pretty huge part of Lifebloom. So honestly, Lifebloom might actually be, like, it could potentially be above efflorescence based on a variety of factors, like based on luck mostly, and obviously your haste can actually improve the amount of clear casting procs you get, simply because Lifebloom is ticking more, and every tick has a 4% chance to give you clear casting. You can be hit by a drought of no clear casting, so it's not exactly like a consistent thing, but Lifebloom can definitely get really high up there on the efficiency front, depending on how many clear casting procs you do get with it. Generally, you want to keep Lifebloom up on a tank at all times. Very rare cases, you do want to be putting it on a non-tank, but like I said, very rare. So definitely you'll have to figure that one out on your own. I don't think that there's like a consistent ideal time to do it, personally. I play it by ear, and I probably do it wrong a lot of the time, but that's part of the video game playing process. You make mistakes, you learn some stuff, and you move on, right? I personally do recommend pretty much always keeping it up on a tank, because that means it'll pretty much always do effective healing, and as long as it's doing effective healing, it is worth the mana, so it's an easy way to get that uptime high, so you can get those clear casting procs, which again gives you a shitload more efficiency. Below Lifebloom, you then have Rejuvenation. Now, Rejuve is really low, but you have to keep in mind that there's a lot of other stuff than just the direct how much it heals number on the tooltip. The Rejuve is a very, very kind of core part of the class. Obviously, Rejuve is affected by several artifact traits, including Dreamwalker. Dreamwalker is the big one, where whenever you cast Wild Growth, you have a 50-50 shot of proccing just a big instant heal to every person who has Rejuve on them. So that means that a lot of the time you want to have several Rejuves out. Pretty much whenever you're casting Wild Growth, you do want an amount of Rejuves greater than 0, right? You do want several Rejuves out at any given moment. Just so when you cast Wild Growth, if it procs Dreamwalker, you just get that free healing. And it will be proccing Dreamwalker a good amount of the time. It's a 50-50 shot. So there's that. Also, Rejuve is like pretty much... I think it's our cheapest way to get a hot effect on somebody. It's like 22,000 mana. Cenarian Ward is more expensive. Wild Growth is way more expensive. Lifebloom is like 26. Regrowth is like 40. Yeah, I think it is just the cheapest way. Oh no, Cenarian Ward is slightly cheaper, but Cenarian Ward only lasts 8 seconds and is a pretty heavy heal. You want to use that for spot healing, not just for mastery. Rejuve can actually have the benefit of just being used to get mastery stacks up. Obviously, it'll do healing on that target as well, but it is basically the cheapest way that we can get hots on people, which allows us to actually utilize one of our secondary stats, right? So it has that benefit as well. Obviously, it has the added benefit of triggering Cultivation, which is the greatest talent of all time. I've seen the light. I've been sold on it. Some dude came to my house, knocked on the door, and was like, "Hey, have I told you about our Lord and Savior Cultivation?" And I was like, "Yeah, I heard about it." And then he stopped me. He put his hand on my mouth and whispered into my ear the secrets of Cultivation, and now I understand. So take Cultivation, like, all the time, forever. It's incredible. And Rejuve is the only way to actually get to Cultivation, so there you go. Below Rejuve, we then have Healing Touch, followed by Regrowth. Healing Touch is bleh. Just pretty bleh. It's just a weak spell. You pretty much never use it. I pretty much never use it. I probably have under 50 total casts of Healing Touch in all of my raid fights this expansion. It's just, it has the problem of basically, like I said before, like having no synergy with the kit, except for the Living Seed when it crits. But if you're aiming for it to have synergy with Living, like just Regrowth, it has a 40% extra chance to crit, right? Regrowth is just better for that. Obviously, Healing Touch costs less mana, and there is one sort of situation, I think I replied to a comment on it today, that kind of talked about it. But basically, there is a situation where I do use Healing Touch, and it's almost exclusively in 5-man content. And that situation, in case you're wondering, is when there's like unpredictable spike damage on the tank. And in those sort of situations, you can pretty cheaply just use Healing Touch because it costs 19,000 mana, almost 20,000 mana. So it's effectively a free roll, right? It doesn't take a lot of your mana to do it. In fact, over a 5-second period, you get, like about double that mana cost? Or double that mana in mana regen. So it's almost a net zero in terms of mana. So it actually is pretty much free to just spam it. The problem is that a lot of the time, it's just better to use Solar Wrath, because Solar Wrath actually makes the fight go faster, instead of just idly spamming Healing Touch. However, spamming Healing Touch does have the added benefit of smoothing out those unpredictable damage spikes, which are quite frequent in Mythic Plus dungeons. So I do like it for that specific use, but that pretty much only ever comes up, in my case, on like 10 plus, basically, and only certain pulls as well. So generally, I would recommend avoiding Healing Touch. Obviously, final spell on the efficiency chart is going to be Regrowth, and that's simply because Regrowth costs a shitload of mana, 41,000 mana for Regrowth, and it heals a pretty low amount. Even though I multiplied the instant heal by 140% to get a more accurate representation of how much it's going to heal on average, it's just the weakest, right? It's just the least efficient. In case you're wondering, my total heal from Regrowth came out to about 240,000, and it costs 41,000 mana, therefore bringing it to about 5.859 health healed per 1 mana spent. To put that into perspective, efflorescence heals almost 32 health per 1 mana spent. So regrowth is pretty bad. However, you do have clear casting, and that makes regrowth one of the spells that you're going to use quite often. Regrowth also has the added benefit of being the fastest, like, instant heal that we have, aside from Swift Mend, of course. It does cast faster than Healing Touch, and it has the added benefit of leaving a hot on the target, which generally makes it better than Healing Touch. Also, it has a higher crit chance, which means on average it's going to heal quite a bit more than Healing Touch, not to mention the fact that the hot also gives you the mastery. So it's just really good to spam regrowth instead of Healing Touch if you need to nuke heal somebody back up. Obviously, I don't like it in the previously mentioned situation where I'm just trying to kind of deal with unpredictable spike damage on a tank, because it actually costs way too much mana to be spamming it, right? Over double the mana cost of Healing Touch. But it does have niche uses where you don't have clear casting. Pretty much any sort of situation where you just want to have a hot on the target to help out with your mastery. And also you need to spot heal them a bit. Regrowth is totally fine for that. For sure. It's not great, but it is totally fine for that. And obviously in the situation where you do have Power of the Archdruid, a lot of the time you are going to be using those procs on Regrowth. And if you don't know what Power of the Archdruid is, that's the other gold trait that affects Wild Growth, where whenever you use Wild Growth, you have a 1 in 4 shot of making your next Rejuve or Regrowth also heal 2 additional allies within the range. And it's very finicky. It's a very finicky ability, but a lot of the time when it procs, you do kind of want to use it on Regrowth. I use it on Rejuve a lot because it actually kind of, I don't know, it segues into the future Wild Growths really, really well. But if there is spot healing that needs to be done, I will generally use it on a Regrowth because, you know, chances are it's going to do 3 times the healing for the same mana cost, and that actually makes it quite good. So that's pretty much it. There's not too much else to say about efficiency. The basic idea of healing as a Resto Druid is going to be lots of Rejuves, lots of Wild Growths, keeping up Efflorescence if it's going to be effective healing, which, by the way, I should be constantly keeping up Efflorescence below the 2 tanks. Terrible mistake that I'm not doing that on the Squarm fight. I do understand that, and I will fix it in the future. Before anybody in the comments talk about how that's like contradicting what I said about Efflorescence, this was recorded like a week ago. All right, I've done a lot of research, done a lot of work to try and make this video work. You know, so I could speak as an authority. And that's all happened after this raid. So don't worry, I see it, I understand it, and I will fix it the next time that I'm raiding. But yeah, so lots of Rejuves, lots of Wild Growths, keep up Efflorescence if there's low movement, and it's going to do effective healing. Swift Mend and Cenarian Ward are both very good spot healing. Try to prioritize Cenarian Ward first because it does heal more and it costs less mana than Swift Mend in general. However, Swift Mend is instant, so there's going to be a lot of cases where that instant heal is going to be a bit stronger than the over 8-second heal of Cenarian Ward. Outside of that, make sure you have high Lifebloom uptime. And that's pretty much it. Regrowth, I just spent like 5 minutes talking about how weird Regrowth is, and sometimes you should be using it. Like right there, I used a Power of the Archdruid proc on Regrowth, even though I didn't have clear casting. It was very interesting. But that is pretty much it. Hey, I just wanted to add at the end of the video, because I realized that I finished the video without explaining it. I want to talk about Spring Blossoms. As I was watching over the video, I did say I would talk about it later, and then I didn't. But let's talk about it now. So Spring Blossoms, pretty simple talent, makes it so your Efflorescence, which is already our most efficient heal, also put a heal over time effect, therefore actually giving it the synergy that it desperately needs. If you are in a situation where you are taking Spring Blossoms, you do pretty much want 100% uptime on Efflorescence. Even if it is going to do a lot of overhealing, it's very important to have those hots rolling, because those hots obviously do get extended by Flourish. They get improved by Essence of Ganir. They obviously also give you more mastery and a variety of other things. So it is very important if you are taking Spring Blossoms to keep that uptime really, really high. And you'll pretty much be taking Spring Blossoms anytime that inner piece is not good. So keep that in mind. And now we'll end this video with an actual outro. So thank you so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I would love to answer any questions that you may have regarding Resto Druid, regarding Legion, regarding whatever. Anything, I'm happy to answer it. You can also, as always, find link to my logs down below, my armory, and my social media, all that shit. It's all down there in the description. Check it out, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.